Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Muffler Podcast. This is episode 24, and today is December 5th, 2024. Thank you to anyone who has already listened and they're coming back for another podcast. But to anyone who's just going around for the first time, big warm welcome. If you're just here for the first time, just joining me, typically I talk about my life and personal stuff on the Muffler Podcast, but I'm switching it up this time because I'm very passionate about the standardized test, the SAT, by the College Board. It's become less prevalent lately in colleges, and a lot of colleges you can apply to without it, but it's extremely helpful to have a good SAT score attached to your SAT. I recommend looking up whatever the school has as their 50th percentile or their median for their school's SAT score, and if you match the median or are higher than the median, then it's definitely helpful. If you are below their 25th percentile, which is one standard deviation less than their median, if you're below the 25th percentile for SAT scores, I'd say don't submit it because you're below average for that school, and now it's a negative. Like, you will be lowering their average. That is my recommendation for SAT scores. The reasons I think that I'm valid advice for SAT, my score has gone up quite a few points, but it's not the best right now. But I know that you can either watch a ton of SAT tip videos like I did. You could do Khan Academy practice, College Board practice, review most of the tests and even more, and take all 6 digital tests, take a test already, like an official test, take an official test already, and take 2 paper tests, and then you'd have the same level of insight on how to get a better score. My score has gone up a total of 290 points while I've been studying for it. I went from an 1110 on my first test to a 1400, with my highest math being a 700 and my highest reading and writing ever being a 750. 750 is competitive for like basically every college, so I'm pretty proud of that, but it took a while to get to that point. When I took my first test, I didn't really have a great idea on what I was doing already, so it's important that you understand what you're doing and that you get in this effort earlier rather than later. Right now it is the 5th of December, so you have about 2 days until the December 7th test, but if you're taking it in March, then you have plenty of time. I'd recommend taking definitely more than one practice test and reviewing the problems you got wrong, heavily studying each problem you got wrong. If you go to mypractice.cb.org, they tell you what sections you are doing the worst in. For your math section, I'd recommend going over to Khan Academy and practicing whatever section they say you're doing the worst in before test day comes around. So with that out of the way, with some of the general tips, I want to get started in the reading and writing section, which is the first section of the test. When you get to your test site, there will be likely some waiting around unless you're late, but when the test starts, you'll be plunged right into the reading and writing. I study the math section a lot, and starting my test with the reading and writing throws me off. So it's important that you practice your reading and writing as well, and you don't just do math questions, because just being able to hold your attention on the SAT reading and writing, which is designed to be boring, for an hour is quite hard. And you need to be able to do that effectively. A lot of reading and writing, in my opinion, seems to just be your headspace going into it. There are studies that show that our brains aren't the most active like immediately as soon as we get up. Probably not even 30 minutes if it takes you 30 minutes to drive there, or 10 minutes to get ready and 20 minutes to drive there. What's smartest is that you wait a couple hours and that you're already awake and you're out of that sleep realm. You're entirely awake. From what I've heard, the best time is 9 a.m. And so I don't know if that's in accordance with a 6 a.m. wake up time, but I'd recommend at least being awake for an hour before you are taking your test. That is my recommendation to you. Typically, they take the SAT test at about 8. I personally will probably be waking up maybe around 6:30, about an hour and a half before. So that is my insight on it. I'd probably recommend for the best, maybe 2 hours beforehand. But if you can't do that, shoot for at least an hour, I'd say, for sure. Because it's really important that you are able to comprehend, because that's most of what the reading and writing section is. It's just logic and being able to quickly understand fully what you're reading. And a lot of these topics are going to be really niche and really obscure, and they're not going to feel like they're of a lot of importance to you, but you need to be able to comprehend them fully as if they were important to you. So that is basically my first tip, is that you need to read the section fully. And you need to try to comprehend with a passion each and every prompt you get. This way, you're not going to end up rereading it twice because you skimmed it too fast and you weren't paying attention. That, for me and for other testers, is a problem where you read over something and then you're like, whoa, I don't even remember what I just read. And then you have to reread it. And that wastes time. And the SAT is purposefully a short amount of time to try and rush you and make you off your game and make you skip questions. So your objective is to be able to read it over in depth one time, answer the question, and move on. That should be your main goal. You want to put in the full effort on each question for an hour. That is, both of the sections combined, is about an hour, especially reading and writing. I think it's 55 minutes if I'm not mistaken. And after that, you get your 10-minute break, okay? So just keep yourself locked in for an hour before you get all that time to yourself to go to the bathroom, eat a snack, and then just sit around and stare at the ceiling and forget about reading and writing before you go into the math section. But another tip for reading and writing is, at least for your first run through all the easy questions, do not use the tools they give you. They will give you a highlighter tool. They will give you notes tools. They will give you like line reading. Some of these aren't a waste of time if you absolutely need them. But if you don't absolutely need them, then on your first run through, just don't use them and try to comprehend it fully, your first read, and try to really try to understand it with a passion, as if you were someone who's a professional in the field, who's extremely impassioned about the material. You want to skip the hardest questions. If you look at a question, you're just going to say, that's going to take me forever to read, even compared to these other hard SAT questions. Then come back to it later. Skipping questions or guessing on questions is absolutely the worst thing you can do on this test. You want to put full effort into every question. If you review your score and you're like, well, I didn't even try, then that's a failure on your part. You want to give it your all on every question and make sure you're not just skimming anything. And then after you've done all your easiest questions, you can go back in and you can do the hardest questions. And maybe then, if you need to, you can use those tools, like the highlighter tool, like the notes tool, like the underline tool, the bold tool. They have all these tools in place for you to use, but only use them when you absolutely have to on the hardest questions to comprehend. They will give you questions that ask you to point out the similarities between two people's points, and they will give you questions to point out the contrast, the difference between two different points. So when you read that, there's typically only one answer choice. And by typically, I mean typically. In the, I think about 8 tests that I've taken now, make that 9. I've taken 9 tests now. In the 9 tests I've taken, I cannot recall a single time where there wasn't only one answer to the question that actually stated a similarity. There are not multiple similarities listed unless the information cannot be found in the text passage. And there are not multiple difference answers listed unless there's information that's not even listed in the text in one of the answers. So just evaluate your similarity, the only one that shows you a similarity, and then just check the text and see if that information is contained in there at all. And there you go. You can skip it as soon as you find that answer and check it. You don't even have to look at the other ones because it's so unlikely that they're going to have another one. Like literally, I don't think I've ever missed one of these, because as soon as you hear similarity, just say they are similar in that, or they both blank. There you go. That is your answer automatically. And the same with contrast, like they differ, or one does this, but the other does that, or anything that's phrased like that actually conveys a difference. It's probably the only answer that conveys a difference, and that will be thus your answer for a contrast question. The reading and writing section, just to conclude, make sure you're in a good headspace when you get there, fully read and comprehend the sections, and don't get too carried away with the tools. Now we get on to the section that is easiest to study for and is less about headspace, is less about subjective things that'll be impacted by your day of testing, things that are hard to study. You know, it's hard to study reading comprehension besides just doing practice tests over and over again. So what do you do for math? This is much more complicated. But once again, there's a fundamental to it that you skip the hardest questions. Recently on my best test score, I skipped 2 questions and guessed on 2. Now this doesn't mean it was my best math score, but it was my best combined score of reading and writing and math. But I know if I wouldn't have taken so dang long on one question, I would have had more time to complete those other 4 questions with full effort and probably would have gotten at least 1 correct. And so it wasn't worth it to spend all my time on the hardest question just to miss some easy questions. So your objective is to skip those hardest questions. Try to, if you start realizing you're taking too long on it and you're running out of time, just skip it. Just skip it, come back to it. It doesn't matter how much time you've already invested in it. That does not impact how much more time it will take you to solve it. It might take a whole nother run, and you don't want to waste all that time on your test when you have other questions that you could be solving faster and correct to up your score. So your objective is to skip the hardest questions, get the easy questions done first, and then come back to the hardest questions. Not in that they're hard as in they rack your brain, but as in they're hard as in they'll take you too much time. Some great advice that I have that has helped me boost my math score dramatically is that I took a practice test, and upon taking that practice test, I'd figure out what questions I got wrong. You know, knowing that I got it wrong, I would hide the correct answers so that I don't know what the right answer is, and then I try to solve it myself logically. If I can't figure that out, then I try to solve it just with the College Board's explanation, or I use YouTube explanation. But once I get to that point, I then try to solve it again with a faster trick, because most of the questions on the SAT are designed to have a trick. None of them are going to be too long that it takes you like 3 minutes to do. Not a single question should take you 3 minutes to do on this test. It should take you no longer than 1:45. That is the calculation on this. That's the longer end there. If you're taking upwards of 1:45 on a question, then you're going to run out of time and you're going to be rushing on the other questions. The easier questions should take you about 1 minute. The harder questions should take you about 2 minutes. And that is what you're going to be looking for here. If you're taking anything over 1:45, then you have to try and figure out a trick or figure out some broader understanding that helps you to solve that question faster. Because those hard questions will show up on your SAT, and you will need to be able to solve them in a short amount of time. I mean, the SAT is extremely limited time on purpose to try and force you to actually understand the questions. So before you get in there and take that test, don't just know the process to solve that type of question. Be able to explain it to somebody else. Be able to explain to somebody else how to solve the question, because you don't just know the processes and you know, well, you just -1, but you understand why you're doing that. You understand why you're solving the question the way you are. You understand, you could set it up in any way and you'd be able to solve it because you understand why. So be able to explain it. Know a trick to do it faster, and then just try to figure it out yourself when you see that you got it wrong. That is my tip on very quickly improving those individual skills without using Khan Academy. But if you do take a practice test, you will have the chance to use Khan Academy for free. You can go to mypractice.cba.org, click on show your score, and then there will be a button somewhere that'll allow you to click on the Khan Academy link. And when you're at Khan Academy, you'll be able to study the exact things you missed, the exact things that you're doing the worst in, and you'll be able to perfect those skills further for the actual test so that you know what you're doing for it. So next up is equations. Equations are pretty hard to memorize, and there are so many of them. I had an entire sheet of paper of equations all written down, and it's extremely hard to just memorize them off the top of your head. I would constantly forget at least 1 or 2 of the equations that I was trying so hard to remember. What's great about that is that you can apply a similar rule to how to solve a problem. You can look at the equation, not as just a set of letters and numbers that you need to remember the meaning of so that you can input values into them, but as different elements that help you to find the solution. All equations are assembled logically because if they weren't, they wouldn't be able to find the solution. Everything that's in an equation is there on purpose because it's the only way that that equation can work. So you need to make sure that you understand why the equation is set up the way it does. Try to understand it to the point that you'll be able to explain the equation to someone, which is another tip I have, is just try to explain it. Understanding how they work and why they work that way, and how the different elements of the equation work hand in hand with each other to give you the solution to that equation is extremely important. The area of a square is like you need to understand why the area of a square is just one side times another side, and then why the volume of a square is a side times a side times a side. Because you might ask yourself, why is that? And then you get to the test and you don't remember because you don't know why it even works that way. You're just remembering these numbers, these exponents that'll get lost in your head. So understand logically why, be able to explain it to somebody else. These are things that might help you remember these equations without having to just repetitively write them over and over again. Because the SAT test is not about just memorization. It's about working hard to have a broader understanding of math topics and reading and writing topics and being able to apply them on a limb, out of nowhere, on new concepts and questions that you may have not seen before. So try to understand the logic behind these things because there will be questions that you have not seen before. I've taken, like I said, 9 different tests, and there are still new questions with concepts that I don't know how to solve. Even though I've reviewed every question I've done, it's still that I still sometimes don't understand this concept. And understanding that broader idea and having a good understanding of how just generally to solve a topic of questions, not because you just remembered the process, but because you know how to teach it. You could teach a student how to solve it in any scenario because you understand the logistics of it. You understand why each element of that works the way it does. And that's especially important for equations, which are incredibly hard to memorize. That is it for my tips on the math and reading and writing section. Additionally, the SAT has a lot of pressure, and it's a pretty hard test. But as long as you review hard and you review for a lengthy period and you put in your best effort, there's a high likelihood that you are going to get a better SAT score than the average student. And if for nothing else, you'll at least get bragging rights from that. Most students who take this test don't even care to study. Just having that statistic that you're better than the average test taker is a good thing. Sometimes that won't be a good thing for colleges because they want you to be the 99th percentile. And if you're not the 99th percentile, then whatever. But it is important that you work hard on this test and you try to do the best you can. It is not a memorization battle. It's an understanding concepts battle, understanding things. That is what this test is all about. And you're not going to understand things without doing the studying to understand every concept at hand here. I recommend taking multiple different SAT tests, not just one official SAT test. And then colleges that you submit that to will super score your SAT test. That means they'll take your best math score and your best reading and writing score out of any of the tests you've officially taken, and they'll combine them to give you a super score. And that is the only test score they'll use. So take multiple, try as hard as you can on multiple, because some tests are just unluckily going to be harder than others. And you need to be able to deal with that by taking multiple tests and getting rid of that error. Anyways, that is it for the tips section. Now, as per Muffler Podcast tradition, I'm just going to get into a few promotions and life updates. Once again, I recommend that you check out my song, Need to Give, by The Muffler Man on Spotify and Apple Music and other music distribution services, including YouTube. And additionally, I recommend checking out other episodes of this podcast, especially the last few in this season. Season 2 have been pretty dang good, so I'd recommend checking those out. Finally, check out my YouTube at A Muffler. I post videos very rarely, but when I do, I try to make them silly. So, but yeah, as far as promotions go, that's about everything I've had come out recently. And then I just want to get into some life updates. I've been getting extremely passionate about college, and I've toured 3 or 4 colleges at this point. I've applied to, I think, 17 or 18 colleges, only some of which I intend on going to. The others I just figured I should apply to just in case, before I knew I was accepted to other ones I was more passionate about. But I am planning on taking the December 7th SAT, and I'm stressed out about it, but I've been studying extremely hard, so I know that it will at least be better than the score that I got in October, which was very lackluster, at least for my standards. Extracurriculars, I've been trying to work on those and get my time in for those. Some of them it's hard, but right now I'm not too worried about the workload. I mean, sometimes it's hard to juggle schoolwork and all that stuff, but I'm doing really good right now, and I'm pretty proud of where I'm at. But yeah, that's a little update on my life. I kind of feel like I'm halfway out the door of my crappy public high school and half foot in the door to an amazing prestigious college, which I'm confident that I'll get into with all the hard work I've been putting in, or at least that is the goal and that is the hope here, that this work will actually mean something. Oh my gosh. But yeah, that is it for the Muffler podcast. This was a mainly academic focused podcast, which is rare for this podcast, but I appreciate everyone listening and giving me your time of day. If you have any questions, I don't know, try to leave them on one of my YouTube videos or something, or figure out another line of communication with me that's connected to one of the things I listed. But yeah, I think for me, that's about it. Do good on your reading and writing and math sections. Study hard, practice well so that you understand the technology when you get to the test room and you're comfortable with it, and don't stress out too much. Thank you for listening to the 24th episode of the Muffler Podcast. We'll return one day in the far future to give you more podcasty content. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.